All right, welcome to my channel. Thanks for joining in. And like I said in the previous video, I'll be talking about the life of Gehazi, the leadership insights I can draw from the life of Gehazi and how he has impacted, how his experience or his experiences, the circumstances of his life, how they impact on us and how they can teach us to become better people and have better experiences in our leadership. So I'll be talking about Gehazi today. I'll be talking about Gehazi, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy what I'm going to be talking about. So first, who is Gehazi? Who is Gehazi? Now, Gehazi was a servant of the prophet Elisha. He was a servant of the prophet Elisha, and he lived around the 9th century BC, around the same time when Elisha lived. He lived around the 9th century BC. He was a servant to the prophet. He was like his assistant. He was like a personal assistant. He was his servant. He was his minister. He was someone who was there, an errand boy for Elisha. The practice was that it was hoped that Gehazi would take after the prophet Elisha after he passed on, or just like Elisha took after Elijah. Elisha took after Elijah. Gehazi was in training. He was a prophet in training. He was expected to take after Elisha when Elisha had gone, or when his time was up, or when he died. So Gehazi was a servant of Elisha who lived around 9th century BC, and his life is very interesting. The first and most important thing I draw from the life of Gehazi is, what's about his name, Gehazi? What's about his name? What about it? What's the interesting thing about his name? Because I believe that if the purpose of a thing is unknown, abuse is inevitable. Now, back in the day, back in those times, people gave names to their children and expected their children to live according to those names. So people had good experiences, just like now. Quite a number of people give good, funny names to their kids. Sometimes when I hear the kind of names that people give to their kids, I wonder what they were thinking when they were giving those names to their kids. Stuff like that. I wonder. But back in the day, people gave names to their children based on their experiences and based on what they wanted those children to experience in life. So they gave names to the children. Now, Gehazi meant, or the meaning of the name Gehazi is a valley of vision. A valley of vision. A valley of vision. And it struck me because Gehazi, a prophet in those days, was someone who saw visions, someone who communicated with visions. God would appear to prophets in those days, and they would have visions of God, and then they would speak what God had said. And Gehazi was a prophet in training. He was a servant to the prophet. It means that from birth, from before he was born, his parents had anticipated that he would become a prophet. He would become someone who saw visions. And it begs to think, a valley of vision. A valley is a low place between mountains. A valley is a low place that is between mountains. So it points out the fact that regardless of how lowly a person may be, it doesn't take away the fact that that person can have a great life. It doesn't take away the fact that that person can have a great life. So the circumstances of your birth may be very, very dire. The circumstances of your birth may be very, very unpleasant. The circumstances around your life may be very unpleasant. But even in such unpleasant situations, good things can still come out of it. So regardless of whether you were born in the valley or whether you were born in the mountain, you could still live a life of greatness. You could still live a life of accomplishments. And your situation should not always determine your perception. Your situation should not always determine your perception. You could be in a bad situation, but that shouldn't affect the perception of life that you have. You could be in a dire situation, but it shouldn't affect the perception of life that you have, because situations are always changing. Situations are always changing. Situations in itself are constant because you would always have situations. But situations always change because they are changeable. They are affected by circumstances that could be from within, or could be from without. So your situation is a changeable circumstance. Your situation is a changeable phenomenon. It is dynamic. Situations change. People could be in great situations today, and tomorrow they'll be in dire situations. People could be in terrible situations this moment, and the next moment they're in great situations. So your situation can change. Your circumstances can change. And this changes, the situation should not affect the kind of perception you have for life. It will be very, very terrible to think of life as such a terrible place to be, or think of yourself as someone who cannot accomplish anything, or someone who is always disadvantaged because you find yourself in disadvantaged situations. Someone who is in the worst situation this moment could have a change of situation and become better tomorrow. Yes, there are many situations that look as though they are unchangeable. There are many situations that look as though they cannot have anything better to come out of them. But even in those dire situations, it is not good to base your life's perception on that situation. The way you see things, the way you see things will, to a large extent, determine how your life will turn out. The way you see life will determine, to a large extent, how your life turns out. So Gehazi's name, a valley of visions, it shows almost two contrasting elements: a valley, a low place, and visions. Visions has to do with progress, seeing the future, seeing something that is beyond you, seeing something that is bigger than you or above you. And if you are in a valley, you can still see something that is bigger than you, that is above you, that is better. If you're in a valley today, it doesn't mean that your life is going to end in the valley. If you're depressed today, it doesn't mean that your life is going to end depressed. If you're downtrodden today, it doesn't mean that your life is going to end as a downtrodden person. So your situation should not affect your perception of life. In fact, your perception has the power to change your situation. Your perception has the power to change your situation. So regardless of how terrible the situation is, if you have a positive perception, it has the capacity, it has the potential to influence your situation and turn it around. And that's how life works. That's how life works. If you wake up in the morning and you go about your daily activities feeling downtrodden, feeling lost, feeling failed, you are most likely to experience failure all the time. You are most likely to experience depressing activities all the time. But if you wake up in the morning and say to yourself, I think this morning is going to be good. What can I do to bring some good out of this morning? And one thing I always tell people is look for the good in every situation. Every time something bad happens, look for the good in those situations. And that's what I think can help people's lives become better. Every time something negative happens, look for the good in those situations. Look for the good in those situations. You know, really, quite recently, a lot of people in Nigeria have been hacking down on pastors who have been quite saying or making quite positive statements, especially about the current president. We know that the elections were marred by a lot of irregularities, and the results are being contested in court. But, you know, pastors, you must understand that the role of a pastor is to inspire hope. And some of the statements that these pastors are making, they're not making them because they have anything to do with the president or anybody in power. They're really not making them because they're benefiting from anyone in power. Well, they could be benefiting, but, well, as a pastor, I know for sure that many times you have in your congregation people who are not always on the same political spectrum or political ideology as you are. So your job as a pastor is not really to impose your political ideology or your political perception on your people. Your job as a pastor is to inspire hope. And that's what many of these pastors are doing when they're saying things like, we believe that one day the naira will become as strong as the dollar. The pastor was hacked down for that. You know, believe that Nigeria will be better under this administration. The pastor saying that is not trying to say, yes, I support this administration. But no, he's trying to tell you, because the Bible says in all things, give thanks to God, for this is good and acceptable. So he is trying to see the good. The Bible says, for all things work together for good to them that love God. So if he loves God, he believes that the situation of the country, regardless of whoever it is that is in power, is going to work for his good. And that's what he's communicating to his congregation. He's trying to say, regardless of whether you voted for this president or not, regardless of whether the economy is in terrible state or not, regardless of whether the country is crazy or not, all things will work for your good. This country will work for your good. And that's a positive way to think. That's a very positive way to think. That's a very positive perception to have. Regardless of whether the country is in the valley, regardless of whether the country is in a place where we didn't choose the leader that we have, we didn't make those choices, we didn't, the choice of leaders we made were overturned, and they were influenced negatively, and people were impressed on us against our will. Regardless of that, the country will work for your good. And that's a positive perception. That helps you to brace yourself for the challenges ahead, and helps you to keep your head up high, knowing that good things will come from the country that you hope in. And that's what I think we can learn from this first lesson from Gehazi, his life, his name, Valley of Visions. On the next episode, I'll talk more on another lesson that I learned from the life of Gehazi. Thanks for watching. Until next time, ciao, stay blessed. Yep.